The Lord be with you. And with your spirit. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. Jesus said to his disciples, I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. You have heard that it was said to your ancestors, you shall not kill, and whoever kills will be liable to judgment. But I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. You have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Again, you have heard that it was said to your ancestors, do not take a false oath, but make good to the Lord all that you vow. But I say to you, do not swear at all. Let your yes mean yes, and your no mean no. Anything more is from the evil one. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So one of our Sunday school teachers was teaching the class about the 10 Commandments, and these were 5 and 6-year-old kids. And one of the boys in the class, he was the youngest. He had 3 older brothers. He was the youngest, and so he was always being picked on, right? And so she says, you must honor your father and your mother. And what other commandment is there about how we should treat others? And so this young boy raises his hand real quick. He says, thou shalt not kill. Yeah, I didn't really think that was a great joke either, but it's because he's been picked on by his older brothers. Thou shalt, okay. All right, I may have to get rid of that one from the repertoire. Well, too often people say, I don't need to go to confession because I haven't killed anyone. I'm essentially a good person, right? And so I think we see this in society as well. It's the idea of relativism. That relativism, what does that mean? There is no moral right or wrong. Just do what you feel like doing. Well, this was going on in Jesus' day as well. And so 2 things. One is we can dismiss the gravity of the sin. The other is we dismiss the grace. I'm going to start with dismissing the gravity of sin. We take our sin too lightly. I ask people often, when's the last time you've been to confession? And they say, well, it's been quite a while, but I haven't robbed any banks. I'm a relatively good person. I haven't murdered anyone. Right, And so they're taking their sin a little bit too lightly. We really need to be serious about understanding the sin that we commit, the places, the times, the thoughts, and the actions that fall short of what God calls us to. And so we're all called to grow in holiness. And if we dismiss the gravity of our sin, there's no way we can grow in holiness, right? And so growing in holiness, Jesus in our gospel, not looking just at external actions, but interior disposition as well. What does he use? He used 3 examples: anger, adultery, and taking an oath, right? And so those 3 examples, not just about the external behavior, but about the internal disposition of our souls. And so anger. So now when Jesus talks about anger, he's not talking about righteous anger. You see something, an injustice being done, you get mad, right? You turn on the TV, you look at what's happening to Ukraine, and you get mad, you get angry, right? That's righteous anger. That's not what Jesus is talking about. The anger that Jesus is talking about in today's gospel is when you fail to forgive somebody else, and you let that anger just boil up inside of you. You let the anger fester, right? Instead of forgiving them. And so, as I often say, if you suppress anger, it's going to express itself in in a bad behavior. So if you suppress it, it's going to express in a bad behavior. And so I always tell people, you have to choose to forgive them and ask God to bless them, and not ask God to bless them with lightning bolts, right? And so choose to forgive, ask God to bless. And then he goes on to talk about adultery. And he says, yes, adultery is wrong, but he also says it's wrong to walk around with an X-rated mind. I'll share a story with you. I had a friend of mine who went to confession finally, and we were chatting, and he says, you know, Father, it's been a long time. Can you help me with my confession? I said, of course. And so I said, have you ever entertained impure thoughts? Have you entertained impure thoughts? And he says, no, Father, they entertain me. Well, that's wrong too. This is what Jesus is getting at. We objectify other people for our own entertainment, our own pleasure, right? And so not just the external action, but what's going on inside. And the last example Jesus uses is taking an oath. Yet let your yes mean yes, let your no mean no. What is Jesus talking about? He's talking about integrity of thought and action, that we must be people of integrity. And we're all called to grow in holiness. And the only way we can do that is by not just looking at the external actions, but our internal disposition, that we cannot dismiss the gravity of sin. And the second area I want to talk on is dismissing grace. So dismissing the gravity of sin, one. Second, dismissing grace. And so we fail to acknowledge and receive and appropriate the grace that is flowing from the cross of Jesus Christ, the grace that came about from his passion, death, and resurrection. And brothers and sisters, if we dismiss or diminish what Jesus done on that cross, there's no way we're going to be able to grow in holiness. And so we ignore the grace that Jesus Christ gives to all of us, and we become like the Pharisees and the scribes. What does Jesus say in our gospel? Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the scribes, you will not inherit the kingdom of heaven. And so we must make sure to appropriate the grace, to be open to God's grace, to say thank you, Jesus, for what you did on the cross, and not focus on our own self-righteousness, not focus on all the good that we're doing, but on the good that God is doing through us and within us. Second area of dismissing grace, I'll call it scrupulosity. Scrupulosity, what does that mean? It means that our relationship with God is more like a courtroom rather than a classroom. More like a courtroom rather than a classroom. Why do I say that? What do I mean? Well, if our relationship with God is that God is punishing, vengeful, he's just waiting for us to make a mistake. It's like a courtroom. We're going to be tried and hung for our mistakes. God, in that image, is full of wrath and vengeance. And so we must avoid, and again, it's dismissing the grace that God's giving us, right? Scrupulosity. And so the other part of scrupulosity that I wanted to mention is, the courtroom, but the classroom also is what we should strive for. That remember when Jesus told his disciples how to pray, what does he say? He says, call God the Father, Abba, your loving Father, a teacher. Jesus was always teaching, right? Teaching, preaching, and healing. That God the Father is Abba, a loving Father. That our relationship with God is more like a classroom where we're learning the right way to go, the right way to do things. We're learning from our mistakes and not a courtroom. And so we must avoid the idea of dismissing the gravity of our sin, and we must avoid dismissing the grace that God wants to give us. So 2 examples. I'll use the examples of lust and anger. The example of lust. Think back, Old Testament, King David, right? And so what's going on with King David? He's out on the veranda. He looks down, and there's Bathsheba, and she's taking a shower, and King David's like, whoo-hoo, right? He's like, Bathsheba was beautiful. And so King David, he lusts in his heart. And that lust in his heart continues to grow, and he dwells on it, right? Instead of nipping it in the bud, the interior disposition, he's lusting. Next thing, what happens? He commits adultery with Bathsheba. Bathsheba is married to Uriah the Hittite, right? He commits adultery with her. And then what happens? She gets pregnant. And so to cover up the pregnancy, what does King David do? He sends Uriah the Hittite out into battle, and then he tells all the other troops to pull back. It started with lust. It went on to become adultery, and then it went on to become murder. See, if we don't take care of sin in our own lives with the internal disposition, that sin is going to grow and become worse and worse and worse, and even to the point of becoming deadly. Okay, second example, and this is another true story. This one happened a couple years ago. It was a case of road rage. This mom was driving along, and her daughter, and a van accidentally cut her off. And so she was so upset. She's yelling, singing, or yelling, and just saying all kinds of bad things, screaming at this van, and telling the person that they're number one, right? But not with this finger. And so she was full of rage, anger. And so the van pulls off the off-ramp. And so she pulls off, follows him. She's still yelling, giving the van driver a piece of her mind, screaming at the top of her lungs. She was full of rage. Finally, when she's done yelling, she rushes back on to the freeway. Unfortunately, in her haste, she went back on the off-ramp, opposing traffic, and a semi-truck hit her, killing both her and her daughter. Anger, again, that interior disposition. If we don't take care of it when it's small, it's going to grow and grow and grow. And next thing you know, it's going to become something big and something deadly. And so we're all called in our lives to bring our sin to Jesus, to recognize sin in our internal disposition and attitudes before it becomes an external behavior, to bring our sin to Jesus, to receive God's mercy. Throw ourselves on God's mercy. Now, growing in holiness, which I've been talking about, yes, it is about not dismissing the gravity of sin and not dismissing the power of God's grace, but it's also not just about running from evil. It's about running to do good as well. And so we're all called to do good in our lives. Run from evil, run to do good for others. Today is our opportunity to do good for someone else. You've heard today is Super Bowl Sunday. Well, today is also PSA Kickoff Sunday. And so today we start the PSA appeal. And so I want everybody to take one of the envelopes that are in the pews. This is for our PSA collection. PSA, Pastoral Services Appeal. It helps all the people here in the Diocese of Orange. It's not meant to be a program that goes outside of our own diocese, but it takes care of the people in our diocese. And so today you can make a donation, you can make a commitment. We just ask that you fill out the envelope, and there'll be a collection. We'll pick up the envelopes in just a minute. But what does the PSA go towards? PSA, it provides support services more than 615 families through Catholic Charities in our diocese. More than 600,000 families are touched by our support. What else? It provides support and education and learning for over 17,000 students in our diocesan Catholic schools. Because, brothers and sisters, not every school is doing financially as well as we are here. Schools in Santana and other areas, Anaheim, they need assistance. And so 17,000 students are helped by PSA. What else? PSA helps 53 retired diocesan priests. 53 of our priests are older than I am, and they're retired, and they need your assistance. And then lastly, and there's a lot more than just this. These are the top four. Your support provides formation for 23 seminarians who are studying to be priests, and ongoing education for our priests and our deacons. And God knows we need that, right? Ongoing education for priests and deacons. And so there's a QR code on there. If you want to use the QR code, you can do that. But I encourage all of you, take an envelope, fill it out now, and in just a moment, they're going to pass around the basket just for PSA envelopes. After we're done with the PSA collection, then we'll have our second collection, the Sunday collection. But I encourage you to please be generous. Our goal here is like 123,000, right? And last year we raised like 200,000 plus. And so what does that extra money go towards? It goes towards refurbishing Quinn Hall. It's going to go towards refurbishing our courtyard. It goes towards making St. Hedwig's a better place. And so I encourage you, please be generous with your PSA. We're all called not just to run from evil, not to just dismiss the gravity of sin and dismiss the power of God's grace, but we're all called to do good. This is a great opportunity to do that. God bless you, and thank you for your generosity.